Historically, life was very precarious here. Everything had to be balanced for life to carry on. My ancestors used the phrase, the world is like living on the edge of a knife. You have to walk carefully, you have to walk in balance or you fall off the edge of the earth, literally.
People, they think it's, the wild frontiers, and they want to come here and just take. So that's what has to change here. People have to realize that we can't just continue taking.
And we have so much integrity built into this journey. Like, it's 30 years since the stand at Lyell. And I think by telling that story, to young people and getting them to kind of embrace that dark chapter, I think you have to know where we come from in order to really come out of it. Because it's an amazing story.
When I imagine life in that time period, I think of it as a completely different existence. It would be a joyful time arriving into the village and seeing the grandeur of the longhouses that we don't see today and the totem poles, and it was certainly a wilder and more colorful existence. Of course, there were hundreds of villages before contact. The thought was that the first explorers were coming from the spirit world, and there was a lot of respect paid, and of course ceremonies and spreading eagle down on the water and the headdress ceremonies to show that we were greeting them in peace as well. But that, of course, wasn't who arrived. They weren't people from the spirit world, and it was a whole unfolding of colonization as we've experienced everywhere in the world. The smallpox epidemics hit so quickly that a lot of the elders said that there wasn't time to bury the people who were dying. They were dying so quickly.
It was a very, obviously a difficult emotional time and a lot of loss, and it was a time when raising of poles and practicing other cultural events was actually being discouraged. Probably the last pole to be raised in Gwaii was over 130 years ago. So we haven't seen any recent pole raisings in Gwaii.
And I think that in some ways we did collapse. With all of the impacts of colonization and the epidemics, our society and our structure and our culture collapsed. I wouldn't say it was a complete collapse, but a partial collapse, because there was this complete assault on who we were as a people, our place in the world.
So we went from a real proud people to a very desperate people, really. It's something I've been doing for over 35 years. Gotta follow the traditional steps, really. Like our ancestors, they would probably carve it in 3 months or so. Without any aids of any pencils and paper. And, they would just visualize it in there and just divide out all the sections and maybe use a piece of charcoal. And so, okay, I'm going to cut it here, I'm going to cut it here. And the way I create my work is through my mind, really. It just comes to me, really. I go to the stories for inspiration.
The rules with which they drew lines are so beautiful. The word that comes to mind more than anything when it comes to Haida artwork and Haida values is respect. It's about respecting the ancestors and the art that they created. Everything is really about respect. This particular piece is called Salmon Debts. It is believed that all creatures, in particular supernatural beings, were like human beings underneath their skin. Really leads into the thought that all creatures on this earth are equal to us. We're not any more important than the fish or the whales or the herring.
I've heard many stories of the interaction with the supernatural beings, and that today the curtain that separates us from the supernatural beings has become thicker, so it's harder to go there. So in that time, the curtain between us and the difference between our realms was very thin.
The supernatural beings do not like to be trampled upon. They're going to cause mankind some problems if we keep on abusing our earth, really.
By quantifying nature, it's how much we can get out of it, how quickly we can get that into our bank accounts instead of having nature renew itself. It feels like the world is getting out of balance, and that is a great cause of concern, and that's really out of lack of respect.
In British Columbia, a dispute over the future of a wilderness area in the Queen Charlotte Islands has led to a confrontation. The loggers and the Indians have been negotiating unsuccessfully for the past 12 years. This week, a group of Haida Indians began obstructing the passage of logging crews into the South Moresby area.
These trees used to be plentiful all along the coast. Today, the Queen Charlotte Islands are the last mother lode of this green gold. Last Wednesday morning, a group of Haida came to Sedgwick Bay on Lyell Island to protect this lifestyle.
You're breaking the law, and you're stopping us from going to work, and we ask you to step aside and let us continue.
There will be no logging on the area that the Haida people have designated as not to be touched. This is Haida land, and there'll be no further logging in this area.
We all seen the videos of, the stand at Lyell. They did what they thought was right. They didn't bank on anybody caring or internationally community, rising up to stand beside them. They just went out to take a stand because they had enough.
These are our homelands. Exploitation of resources and in the management of these islands that the people who are here sharing these lands with us respect equally with everyone else the aspirations and the values of the Haida Nation. We've been here for thousands of years. We intend to be here for thousands more.
There came a point when we saw the extent of the devastation and knew that we had to stop. Diane Brown has talked about how if that didn't happen when it did, that it would have affected the future of the whole earth, not just Haida Gwaii, but everywhere, that it was a fork in the road, that if we didn't do what we did, then it would have affected everyone on the earth and our balance with the earth.
And it's not just a one-sided story either. One of the elders there, Fussy Marks, has his legendary quote of saying, we're not just doing this for us. We're doing this for, what at the time he called the white people. Well, what are they going to log? Just like that simplicity of saying, look, this is not just about the Haida people. At the end of the day, that's what the fight is for. It's for everybody that respects this island and wants to call it home, and for forever.
Lyell Island wasn't just a blockade, it wasn't just a standoff, it was an exercise of our laws. The laws that are embedded in our culture that say we must protect this earth, we must protect the land, and we've got to find a better balance for how we live with the earth.
That event got national and international attention and resulted in the province of British Columbia and the federal government coming together and signing what we call the South Moresby Agreement. More than 20 years after its signing, it's still talked about as an agreement before its time.
Under the dual authorities, both governments create and implement their own law.
If you look at the first page of that agreement, it's a disagreement. It's an agreement to disagree, and The Haida are very clear that this is Haida land. Federal government is very clear this is Canada's land. And both parties agree to respect those opposing views and come together and work together.
It's a model that is beyond consultation and accommodation and getting consent, because we're jointly working together to find a solution. At its heart, it's reconciliation. It's finding a way to bring us together.
You know, for some Haida people, they have a tough time with that because they don't like the idea of sharing, considering that dark chapter. Some people say, why don't share with anybody when we got treated a certain way? But our elders taught us different. You know, they said, you know, that's how you feel, but that's not the right answer. The right answer is to coexist with our neighbor. You know, that's the roots of everything.
We raised the Gwaii legacy pole in 2013 to celebrate the relationship that we had had. It tells the story of Gwaii right from the beginning of time up until today. It incorporates a number of different images that represent different periods of time and tells the stories.
Okay, you guys ready? Down. 1, 2, 3, heave! Off on that side. Okay, we're good. Keep going. Easy. Easy.
You know, to have a pole up to commemorate, you know, how far we've come. You know, it's kind of mind-boggling to think, you know, what can happen in 30 years. You know, because in that 30-year period, you know, we've done an unbelievable amount of things that's now kind of coming into context about how groundbreaking it all was. And now we're looking in the water. You know, we're looking for the same approach. We're looking for equal say in how you treat the waters of Haida Gwaii, including the resources within them. We're talking about fish.
One of the biggest problems on the coast right now is with the herring fishery because of basically the lack of herring.
Herring and others are indicator species, but they're also cultural keystone species. You will see herring and salmon and cedar and other important resources like that throughout, mentioned many, many, many times throughout stories. And we know from that they are really important beings that we need to protect.
Herring are the signal of the food season in terms of the ocean. It's the first moment at which we stop eating from our freezers and we start eating from the ocean again. And I think everybody who lives on Haida Gwaii can appreciate coming out of the spring and the herring arriving, returning, is a signal for that.
Our concern around herring is that it's been closed for 10 years, and that's not necessarily the Haida shutting it down. It's, you know, DFO shut down herring fishery because it collapsed. We were pretty happy that it was shut down for the last 10 years because we just believe it hasn't recovered. And I think it was starting to show maybe some optimism that it was going to come back, but wasn't anywhere close to being opened.
Herring are one of the main diets of spring salmon, which is very, very important to our diet, but it's also the diet for a lot of the killer whales. It just shows that anything that feed on herring are in jeopardy as it goes up, the food web.
So we just started asking ourselves the question, well, why? Like, why are they opening the herring fishery when they know, you know, even the science of the time says, you know, it's not ready?
The commercial fishery has always been like gambling in a way, I think. And that's what's going on really, is they're gambling with a resource and, you know, hoping that it's going to turn out all right. You know, maybe that's part of their job, is to make educated guess. But if they don't get it right, then they don't have any, there's nobody responsible. You know.
It should be an easy way for us to reach a solution together because the sustainability issues are clear.
So that's kind of the root of the conflict, is DFO opens it, Haida Nation said it's still closed, so what happens? It's going down this path where herring could potentially be the Lyell Island, you know, on the water, where we're saying enough is enough. Like, you can't continue to wipe out species that the Haida depend on with zero consequences.
Balance is about sustainability. We know that life on Earth is always changing, but on the other hand, our place on this earth should be about keeping balance and not taking more than we need, and also taking so much that the other creatures can't sustain themselves.
And that's really what it's all about. I mean, is trying to create this balance, right? So I think that's what we're starting to do slowly. And there's a lot of pressure on ensuring that the integrity is always there, but it's just such a different world today. But we have that history to rely on the values and principles that we got to uphold in this. It does us well. I mean, that history has so much application in today, when we're sitting down with government or with industry and, looking back at the Haida Gwaii story, I think people do, treat us a little bit different here because, it's not just talk, we've walked that journey, and, you have to be able to continue that in a modern setting.
We are the stories we tell. And the whole history of colonization has been one of a taking and of the government unilaterally making decisions about everything, really, even our day-to-day life. And so with that comes a sort of a attitude or sense of dependency and victim. And so as we've taken steps in asserting our laws over the landscape and fulfilling our responsibilities, we see less of that attitude in the younger generation who didn't have to face that same history, who didn't have to face what our elders went through. And so they have a completely different story that they see. They see a history where we have power and words mean something, and the actions, when we say no more, then we mean no more, and we will do whatever it takes to protect the land.
I think we're very optimistic because, when you ask kids, whether they're in grade kindergarten to graduation, do you guys know what Lyell Island is? Every single one of those kids, whether they're Haida or not, know the story, right? So it's up to us to make sure that they know the rest of the story, so that they can feel inspired to come work and protect Haida Gwaii. I mean, that's what it's all about.